Well, faithfully delivering value and interpreting great global books. Hi there, this is Sally's Book Talks. Today, I'm going to interpret this book for you called A Brief History of Globalization. Oh, in most people's minds, globalization is pretty recent, because just 30 or 40 years back, even in one country, regions weren't nearly as connected as today. Yeah, most folks' lives were actually narrow and closed off. Then, in the 21st century, with the internet booming, places got linked up seamlessly, and bam, the whole world turned into a global village. Perspective. People with broader views might say that since the late 1400s, Europeans kicked off the age of discovery, linking continents, and boom, humanity started globalizing. So, by that count, globalization's been going on for over 500 years. American economist Jeffrey Sachs thinks this isn't long enough. He traces it back to about 70,000 years ago, when our ancestors left Africa and spread across the world. In other words, globalization unfolded alongside human migration, population growth, tech advances, and all that.
But for ages, it was super slow, barely noticeable. Then, in the last 100 years or so, it sped up big time, and regular folks finally felt it.
So globalization ain't new. It's rooted in our genes and instincts, something we do naturally. As long as we're alive and thriving, globalization won't stop. Deglobalization, basically, it's anti-human. It might win for a bit, but won't triumph in the end. To show this, Jeffrey Sachs wrote A Brief History of Globalization. First off, let me introduce Sachs. He's a Harvard grad, taught economics at Columbia, and ran Harvard's Center for International Development. In the 1990s, he advised Poland, Russia, and others on economic changes. His radical plans caused chaos fast, so it was called shock therapy. He's famous as the father of shock therapy. In the 2000s, he focused on globalization, and this book is his latest work. Once published, the book got huge buzz and is seen as one of the best on globalization so far. It splits globalization into 7 eras: Paleolithic Age, Neolithic Age, Equestrian Age, Classical Age, Maritime Age, Industrial Age, and Digital Age. By clarifying the development paths and unique features of these 7 eras, people gain deep insight into globalization, allowing us to better grasp history. Looking ahead, I'll cover this book in 4 parts. Part 1 kicks off with the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. Part 2 delves deeper into the Equestrian and Classical ages. Part 3 surges forward with the Maritime and Industrial ages. Part 4 brings both promise and challenges, the digital age and its obstacles.
All right, now let's begin with part 1.
The Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. Archaeologically, the Paleolithic age refers to the period from about 3 million years ago. Our ancestors learned to make simple tools from stones, like choppers and scrapers, for gathering and hunting. Of course, for most of that long period, they did these activities in Africa, humanity's birthplace. It wasn't until about 70,000 years ago that humans left Africa to explore the wider world, kicking off globalization. Humans first reached Europe, bordering Africa, then migrated eastward across Eurasia. By 45,000 years ago, they'd reached Australia. 15,000 years ago, they crossed the Bering Land Bridge to the Americas. Throughout this spread, 2 key skills traveled with them. First, hunting techniques. Wherever humans went, they massively hunted animals, like Australia's giant kangaroos, monitor lizards, pythons, and America's wild horses, woolly mammoths, and saber-toothed cats, literally hunting them to extinction. The other skill was language. Scientists haven't settled on its exact origins, but one thing's clear: language was the Paleolithic age's greatest technological breakthrough. With language, humans could communicate easily and collaborate deeply. Physically weaker humans could hunt massive beasts, precisely because language enabled coordinated teamwork. So the hallmark of Paleolithic globalization was the spread of both hunting and language. Archaeological evidence shows that by the late Paleolithic, many lived in clan-based settlements of about 150 people. Complex societies, but gathering and hunting require mobility, so why settle?
Yeah.
Well, It's because they'd mastered advanced techniques to shape stones into Neolithic tools like knives and axes, then used them for farming. Yeah, this is the origin of agriculture, dating back about 10,000 years ago, when humans entered the Neolithic age. Well, it should be clarified that agriculture didn't start everywhere at once. Certain areas mastered farming tech first and spread it outward. For instance, Eurasia had two agricultural origins, one stretching from Egypt to modern-day Iraq, often called the Fertile Crescent. This is where wheat originated, and wheat seeds and farming methods elsewhere all came from the Fertile Crescent. The other is in China's Yellow River and Yangtze River basins, the origin of millet and rice. In the Americas, agriculture began with corn farming in modern Mexico and potato cultivation in the Andes Mountains. Compared to hunting, farming's tougher and gives less reward. Let's compare. Humans get 2,000 calories from 4 hours of hunting, but farming 1 hectare for 6 hours only yields 1,800 calories. Hardly worth it. But farming has one edge. It supports more people per unit area. Resources per square kilometer can feed just one hunter, but up to 10 farmers. Reproduction's a human instinct. No surprise, more and more folks chose farming to settle down. So globalization here meant agricultural globalization. Across Eurasia and Africa, 5 major farming zones formed east to west. China's Yellow River Basin, Yangtze Basin, South Asia's Indus-Ganges Basin, the Middle East's Tigris-Euphrates Basin, and ancient Egypt's Nile Basin, spanning thousands of miles. Notably, all 5 zones lie between 25 and 45 degrees north latitude. This zone's climate and ecology suit farming, crops, and livestock, dubbed the Lucky Latitude Belt by the author. In 10,000 BCE, global population was just 2 million. By 3000 BCE, late Neolithic, it hit 45 million, mostly in the Lucky Belt. Writing, a key civilization marker, emerged there too. Around 3500 BCE, Sumerians in the Tigris-Euphrates created pictographs, evolving into cuneiform, while Egyptians developed their own script. The exact link between Sumerian and Egyptian writing remains unclear. Still, trade routes existed between the Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile basins, showing early contact. Historians reckon the two writing systems probably influenced each other. Also, it's certain that both Sumerian and ancient Egyptian scripts influenced the Phoenicians in North Africa. Building on these, the Phoenicians created their own writing system. Later, ancient Greeks adapted the Phoenician script into the Greek alphabet. Then the Romans modified the Greek alphabet into the Latin alphabet. Trace it on a map and you'll see writing spread from the Middle East and North Africa to southern Europe, sparking key sources of Western civilization. Ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. Wow, that's like a mini globalization snapshot. Similar patterns happened elsewhere too. This shows that even as humans shifted from mobile hunting to settled farming, cross-regional tech and cultural exchanges never stopped. Of course, differences existed. The Middle East, North Africa, and Southern Europe hugged the Mediterranean coast. Shipping thrived, travel was easy, so connections stayed tight. East Asia sat at Eurasia's far end, so distant that outside influences took centuries, even millennia, to show up. Beyond the Lucky Belt, like Central or Southern Africa, Australia, and the Americas, civilization spread much harder. Now, about the Americas. Actually, much of today's U.S. is in the Lucky Belt. But around 10,000 years ago, when the Neolithic began, rising seas drowned the Bering Land Bridge, cutting off the Americas and forcing them out of globalization. Though Native Americans built civilizations like Olmec, Maya, and Inca, they lagged overall. So when 16th century Europeans arrived, they stood little chance. The Americas' absence meant globalization centered on Eurasia, especially the Lucky Belt, for ages. So what did that look like? In Part 2, Deepening Development, the Equestrian and Classical Ages, I'll explore this. As tech advanced, humans mastered bronze smelting, and bronze gradually replaced stone as the main tool material. Archaeologists call this the Bronze Age, but the author uniquely dubs 30,000 to 1000 BCE the Equestrian Age. Well, this is thinking from a globalization perspective because taming wild horses was super crucial for pushing it forward. And wild horses used to be all over the world, but their numbers dropped big time in the Paleolithic Age. Why? Because of human hunting, like I said before, which wiped out large animals, including wild horses. Wild horses in the Americas went extinct completely, while in Eurasia, they retreated to grasslands north of the Lucky Latitude Belt. This area stretched from the Caucasus Mountains to the Mongolian Plateau. Lush grass, great climate, and away from people, perfect for wild horses. Around 3000 BCE, farmers near the northern edge of the Lucky Belt domesticated wild horses. At first, they might have just used horses to carry loads, but then farmers hopped on and went nomadic, chasing water and grass. They soon found that nomadism had way more perks than farming. Like, nomads could zip around fast, targeting weak spots in farming societies, and war horses hit hard. Farmer infantry couldn't stand a chance. So once nomads got on horses, the big farming zones in the Lucky Belt got raided a lot. But there's another side. Fighting nomads long term, farming societies learned to handle horses too, boosting how they organize and mobilize. This laid the groundwork for big nations to emerge. Egypt's first united dynasty, the First Dynasty, plus Sumerian and Old Babylonian ones in Mesopotamia, they all built on using horses widely. Rulers formed cavalry and chariot troops to expand lands and crush revolts, and used horses for fast messaging to spread orders. Plus, horses and donkeys hauled goods, keeping kingdoms supplied.
Egyptian pharaohs pulling off pyramid builds with huge resources. Yeah, horses and donkeys were key.
After mastering war horses and chariots, the Shang dynasty spanned the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, becoming East Asia's superpower at the time. Clearly, the Equestrian Age's big thing was horses going global. But as an old Chinese saying goes, you can win the world on a horse, but not run it from one, meaning horses made ruling big empires possible. But to make that happen, we needed breakthroughs in philosophy, management, science, and tech. Simply put, humanity needed a quantum leap to break free from ignorance and embrace classical civilization. This shift began around 1000 BCE and lasted until 1500 CE, what the author terms the classical age, defined by its unique characteristics. The author summarizes it in 5 words: political globalization. How do we understand this? In this era, great civilizations emerging from the Lucky Latitude Belt, ancient Greece, Rome, Persia, India, and China, all leveraged state power to spread ideas and technology while building infrastructure. Their goal was connecting every corner of their empires to enforce ideologies and political systems. For example, in 337 BCE, Macedon in eastern Greece unified the Greek city-states. 2 years later, King Alexander launched an eastern campaign. Starting from the Mediterranean, he conquered Mesopotamia, reached the Indus Valley, fighting nonstop for 10 years over thousands of miles. He built the Macedonian Empire, spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa. Greek political philosophy, literature, and arts spread alongside iron technology. For centuries after, Greek became the lingua franca from the Mediterranean to the Indus, with educated elites reading Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek thinkers. This was Hellenization. Then came Romanization. Around the start of the Common Era, Romans built a Mediterranean-centered empire spanning 3 continents. They constructed vast road networks linking regions. Unified Roman law, currency, and administration prevailed. Latin became the written language. Many regions entered civilization only through Roman rule, like modern Britain, France, and Spain. Later, Christianity flourished and spread across Europe. Rome also traded and exchanged ideas with China at Eurasia's other end. Via the Silk Road, Chinese silk reached Rome while Mediterranean glass arrived in Chang'an. Emperor Marcus Aurelius even sent envoys to China's Han Dynasty, seeking formal ties. Sadly, transportation limits prevented full-scale Hellenization or Romanization there. This wasn't unique in the Classical Age. By the 8th century CE, four major civilization spheres formed in the Lucky Belt. Europe's Christian sphere, the Islamic sphere across Arabia, Middle East, and North Africa, South Asia's Hindu sphere radiating to Southeast Asia, and East Asia's Confucian-centered Chinese sphere. In the 13th century, Mongol cavalry swept across Eurasia, building the largest contiguous land empire in history. Their invasions caused millions of deaths, but hey, they also boosted exchanges among the four major civilization spheres. East-West trade expanded massively as a result. It's worth noting that the Mongol Empire spurred development beyond the Lucky Latitude Belt. For example, Russia was on the fringes of civilization spheres, wild and backward, but over 2 centuries of Mongol rule gave it administrative know-how, laying the groundwork for the future Russian Empire. From the Equestrian Age to the Classical Age, human civilization clearly kept spreading and deepening. By the late Classical Age, the global population topped 400 million, nearly 10 times that of the late Neolithic Age. Well, this shows globalization boosted economies, improved lives, and let societies support way more people. But until the late 15th century, globalization's reach and depth were still limited, mainly cause of two big reasons. First, direct exchanges between East and West faced tons of obstacles. Second, the Americas were totally outside the globalization game. To level up, we had to break these barriers. What Part 3, Surge Forward, is all about. The main focus of the maritime and industrial ages, looking back from about 70,000 years ago, globalization rolled through the Paleolithic, Neolithic, Equestrian, and Classical ages, mostly over land. But from the 14th century, the Ottoman Empire blocked east-west land routes. Chinese silk, porcelain, Southeast Asian spices, and cotton goods had to go through making prices sky high, so Europeans looked for new ways to connect directly. Since land routes were blocked, they turned to the sea. In 1498, Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, crossed the Indian Ocean, reached India. Boom, the sea route to the east was open. This kicked off the Maritime Age. The Portuguese quickly grabbed control of Indian Ocean trade from the Ottomans through violence. After that, they sailed through the Strait of Malacca, pushed into the Pacific, and snatched up Southeast Asian spices. The fat profits from trade drew in other European countries. Spain took what's now the Philippines. The Dutch grabbed the East Indies, and Britain slowly turned all of India into a colony. Well, Europeans were opening up trade routes to the east while expanding westward. In 1492, Columbus, funded by the Spanish king, crossed the Atlantic and reached the Caribbean islands. And over the next few decades, Spanish colonists used the Caribbean islands as a springboard to land on the American continent and set up colonies. Britain, France, the Netherlands, and others followed right after, carving up the Americas. Europeans brought livestock like horses, cattle, and sheep, plus crops such as wheat and sugarcane, to the Americas. In return, tobacco, corn, and potatoes from the Americas were sent to Europe and then spread worldwide, known as the Columbian Exchange. The isolation between the Americas and Eurasia was completely broken, pulling the Americas into the globalization process. Of course, this was Eurocentric globalization. The goal of globalization back then was this. European colonies trafficked enslaved Africans to the Americas to mine gold and silver, then used that bullion to buy Chinese silk, porcelain, tea, Southeast Asian spices, and Indian cotton and textiles, shipping them back to Europe for huge profits. In the mid to late 18th century, Britain began colonizing Australia, tapping into resources like wool and coal there. So Australia also joined this massive maritime trade network. The author of this book notes that true global trade only kicked off with the Maritime Age. Therefore, the main theme of globalization in this phase was trade globalization, and global wars popped up during this time too. From 1756 to 1763, a series of wars happened with Britain, Prussia, and others on one side, and France, Spain, and others on the other, known as the 7 Years' War. It started in Europe and spread to overseas colonies of Britain, France, Spain, etc., pulling in Europe, North America, South America, Africa, and Asia. The 7 Years' War ended with France and Spain defeated, but they weren't ready to accept it. In 1776, the American Revolutionary War broke out, and France and Spain stepped in to help America break free from British colonial rule. Later, Napoleonic Wars also swept across Europe and reached Africa and the Americas. Turns out, globalization isn't just about trade. Globalization is also about war.
Globalization.
The logic's simple. Major powers' interests span the globe, so any conflict between them is bound to blow up worldwide. This became super clear with the start of the Industrial Age, and it eventually led to the two world wars. So, what exactly is the Industrial Age? And when did it begin? The Industrial Revolution began in Britain during the 18th century, especially in 1776, when James Watt improved the steam engine and applied it to textiles, metallurgy, trains, ships, and more, massively boosting productivity. But it wasn't until the 19th century that Britain's industrial achievements spread globally, gradually creating industrial globalization. That's when it truly became an era.
Yeah, uh,
Industrial globalization spread from Britain outward to the world. Think of it like throwing a stone into water. The impact hits where it lands first, and ripples reach farther areas later. So we saw France, Netherlands, and Belgium, closest to Britain, industrialize first, then Spain, Germany, Italy, and Nordic nations. After that came Eastern Europe and Russia, while Asia and Africa started industrializing much later. But there were two exceptions. First, the US, originally a British colony settled by European immigrants. Thanks to that special kinship, the US, oceans away, benefited early from industrialization, becoming a powerhouse.
Yeah, there was Japan.
After the Meiji Restoration, it fully adopted Western science and tech, using state power to industrialize. Other regions weren't so lucky. As industrialization surged, the West's lead in income, industry, and military power became unprecedented. For example, in 1888, America's total GDP surpassed China's. By 1913, U.S. per capita GDP hit approximately $5,000, second only to Britain. Britain's was 8 times China and India's, a structural gap since underdeveloped regions became colonies. Economically dependent on exporting raw materials, India long relied on food and textile exports, unable to build domestic industry. Post-World War II, national liberation movements surged across Asia and Africa, birthing new nations. Refusing to be Western economic satellites, they pursued industrial strength, igniting a new wave of industrial globalization. The single quote for Asian tigers, like Singapore or South Korea, and emerging nations, China or India, gained momentum, narrowing gaps with developed countries as economic divergence turned toward convergence. According to statistics, from 1820 to 1950, economic growth rates in Europe and America far exceeded those in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. After that, Asia, Africa, and Latin America caught up rapidly. In the 1990s, China's economy entered a high-speed development phase, becoming one of globalization's most crucial driving forces. The achievements of industrial globalization are remarkable. In 1800, the global population was 1 billion. By 2000, it surged to 6.65 billion. It was precisely industrial globalization's rapid advance that accumulated unprecedented wealth, enabling us to sustain so many people. But there's a hidden risk. 19th century British economist Malthus noted that population grows geometrically, while resources grow arithmetically, the former far outpacing the latter, and many contrast. Thus, productivity gains get offset by population growth, trapping most in poverty and hunger, the Malthusian trap. The author argues trade and industrial globalization massively boosted productivity, allowing humanity to create more wealth in the last 200 years than in previous millennia combined, thus avoiding the Malthusian trap. I mean, one
But Malthus's warning remains relevant. To escape this trap permanently, humanity must pursue sustainable development.
This requires constantly seeking new growth drivers to deepen globalization. So, has this new growth driver been found?
And what is it?
In part 4, Promises and Challenges, the Digital Age, I'll reveal the answer. The author believes globalization's latest growth driver is the digital revolution, which requires tracing modern computing's history. In 1936, British mathematician Alan Turing published a paper titled Uncomputable Numbers with an Application to the Einstein's Problem. Turing proposed building a machine that could read endless zeros and ones to compute anything computable. This was the earliest conception of a universal computer. In 1945, American mathematician John von Neumann designed modern computing's basic structure, the von Neumann architecture, including processing unit, control unit, working memory, input-output devices, and external mass storage. MIT professor Claude Shannon then noted that installing Turing's binary program on von Neumann's framework would essentially create a computer. Well, the invention of integrated circuits made von Neumann's architecture achievable.
Engineers followed Shannon's advice, loaded the binary program, and the modern computer was born.
Early electronic computers were bulky and slow. Hard to imagine they'd spark a revolution. But in 1965, Intel CEO Gordon Moore observed that transistors on integrated circuits doubled every year or two, meaning computing power grows exponentially. This became Moore's Law. Indeed, that's what happened. In 1971, Intel's microprocessor had 2,300 transistors. By 1917, it reached 8 billion, doubling every 2 years for 46 years straight. Computer capacity exploded, massively boosting information processing. Connectivity surged too. Fiber optics accelerated data transmission speed, accuracy, and scale, enabling long-distance computer links. In the 1980s, IBM launched personal computers, bringing them into offices and homes. In the 1990s, the internet was born. This meant that anywhere with an internet-connected computer became a portal to the digital world. But the internet truly boomed in the 21st century when the digital revolution kicked off. Thus, the author calls this the digital age. This is globalization's seventh era, and the one we're living in now, its hallmark, digital globalization. So how does digital revolution drive globalization?
The key is it accelerates knowledge and tech spread, slashes access costs, enabling mass adoption.
Digital globalization means advanced tech isn't monopolized by developed nations. Innovation increasingly flows from developing countries. For example, per World Intellectual Property Organization data, as of 2017, the U.S. led with 56,624 international patent applications. China followed with 48,882, then Japan, Germany, and South Korea.
China became the #2 patent filer under the Patent Cooperation Treaty, the first time since the Industrial Revolution that innovation isn't Western-centric.
Clearly, digital globalization flattened the world technologically and helped slash extreme poverty. In 1990, 1.9 billion lived in extreme poverty, 35.9% of humanity. In 2015, that number dropped to 726 million, accounting for 10% of the global population. Even though digital globalization's only been around for about 20 years, its breadth and depth are stunning. It's penetrated industry, commerce, entertainment, finance, politics, military, you name it. And its impact on human life is equally profound. By June 2019, over 4.4 billion people were online, 829 million in China, 560 million in India, and 293 million in the US. They work, shop, and communicate online. generating about 44 zettabytes of data daily. We're living through an explosion of knowledge and information, and this isn't the end. The latest chess AI capability taught itself in hours and surpassed all chess experts' combined skills over 6 centuries. This mind-blowing learning ability means digital globalization has massive potential. Its growth phase isn't over yet. One day, digital will underpin all human activity. Everything looks rosy, but remember, if you don't plan long-term, you'll face immediate troubles. Progress always carries risks. The author believes the digital age brings 3 huge challenges for humanity. If mishandled, they'll cause massive damage, even derail globalization. Challenge 1. Economic inequality. Digital globalization spreads tech and cuts extreme poverty. That's good. But it might worsen relative poverty. How so? Tech progress creates winners and losers. Winners gain, losers suffer. Like power looms replacing Indian weavers, plunging them into poverty, or robots taking auto jobs.
In the digital age, more jobs will be replaced by AI.
Challenge 2. Global environmental crisis. Since the industrial age, burning fossil fuels has spewed greenhouse gases, accelerating global warming.
Our endless growth drive worsens air or ocean pollution, soil erosion, species extinction.
The crisis can't be ignored. Challenge 3. Global conflict. History shows transitions between globalization eras often spark violent clashes. The shift from classical to maritime age was marked by European violence against Native Americans and African slaves. From the maritime to the industrial age, marked by Britain's conquest of India and invasion of China, the industrial age also witnessed 2 world wars. Currently, as trade hubs and tech innovation shift from Western nations to emerging ones, the global power balance is changing dramatically, escalating risks of major power conflicts.
And amid globalization, such conflicts will inevitably spread worldwide, causing massive global upheaval.
So, how should humanity tackle these 3 great challenges?
The author's solution: still advancing globalization to solve problems.
Hopeful and collaborative vision. Humanity must collaborate closely, using past globalization experiences to create global governance, redistributing income, jointly tackling environmental crises, and resolving geopolitical tensions. Overall, the author remains optimistic about globalization's future.
He concludes the book with this line:
Our greatest hope is to use history's lessons and our shared humanity to usher in a new era of global cooperation. All right, a brief history of globalization. That wraps up our interpretation. Find reading notes below the audio. See you next time.